On the Laracast series page, I have this section that lists your currently in progress series. And basically the way this works behind the scenes is each time you complete a lesson, it doesn't update a pivot table or anything like that. It in fact pushes to Redis. That way, at any given time, you can see a handful of the series that you're currently working your way through. So yeah, as it turns out, this is a great use case for Redis. I'm going to show you an example here. I've set up a new project where I just have a bunch of lessons. If we visit them, we see it. Very, very simple stuff. So I want to implement a system like recently viewed or recently visited or currently in progress. The same basic concept. When I visit one of these, yeah, it's going to be pushed to Redis so that when I come back at the very top, you will see it. Recently visited or currently in progress. Let's get started. Here we have the controller for what you just saw. When you visit the home page, fetch all lessons, and then load a view. That view will filter through the lessons and display each within a list item, and that's what you see here. Next, when you click on one, we hit the show method that loads a show view, and as you can expect, yeah, super simple. We're not even using layout files, just basic stuff here. Okay, so it sounds like when we visit a specific lesson, we will push to Redis. Now, what kind of data type do we use? Because of course, we could push to a list, we could push to a set, or we could push to a Z set, a sorted set. What is the best choice? Well, first, maybe a quick recap. I know it's easy to forget the differences. For list, again, just think of it as PHP array, just the most basic form of an array. A set is like an array, but includes some bonuses, like the fact that each item must be unique. So if I push 5, then 4, and then 5 to a set, it's just going to contain 5 and 4, not two occurrences of 5. And then finally, a sorted set, again, is like a set, but includes some more bonuses, specifically the fact that you can attach a score to each item. And that way you can return the results or sort the results according to that score. Now, what happens, though, is that people, and we've talked about this, people often think, well, the score, it's good for a game where points matter, but beyond that, I don't know when to use it. And that's just not true. There's so many different use cases. For example, you could even use the current timestamp as your score. And as it turns out, that's what we're going to do here. Let's try it out. Let's say Redis, and we're going to push to a sorted set, so we can use Z-add for that. And the name, how about user? Let's namespace it to a user. We don't have a signed-in user or an authentication system, so let's just assume that the current user is the one with an ID of 1. And maybe we'll call it in progress. Okay, so we have to give it a score of some form, and then finally we have to give it some data. And I'm just going to stick with the ID of the lesson. But just remember, yeah, if you want, you could always cast that to an array. And then this is especially good for like news items, where you want to say 5 most recently published news items. You display it in a little widget in your sidebar, and all of that data is dynamic, but also never touches the database when rendered. Very, very cool. But yeah, in our case, let's keep it simple. Let's just stick with IDs. Okay, so I will import that at the top, illuminate support facades Redis. And you know what? Let's just see if it's working. So we're going to go back to Chrome and visit any item. Okay. I will next open up the Redis command line. And let's fetch a Z range on user.1.inProgress, starting at the first, ending at the very last item. And we get 16, and that happens to be the ID of the lesson, as you can see right here. Let's do one more. Let's do 25, and then finally the last lesson, which has an ID of 30. Okay, 16, 25, and 30. So if I were rendering these, I actually want them in reverse, right? I visited the lesson with an ID of 30 most recently, so that should be on top. We can do that by simply saying Z rev range or reverse range. Now though, what about the score aspect? Let's come back and visit the lesson with an ID of 16 again. And it doesn't matter how many times we click it because we're not using increment by. We're not saying Z incre by, we're just saying Z add. And when you call Z add and the item currently exists, it just updates the score. That's it. But this does present a problem, because I give it a bunch of clicks and I would want that to jump to the top, but it's always at the bottom no matter what. if we go to the lesson with an ID of 25, again, that won't jump to the top. It stays where it is. So it sounds like we don't want to use a score of 1. We are instead going to use the current time. So now think about it. Whenever you visit a lesson or a video or a news article, at all times, because we're using a timestamp, when we are sorting those results, that most recently visited article will always be at the top of the stack. Let's try it out. Give it a refresh. And now if we run it, and do note the ID, 25. Anyways, now if we run it, 25 is at the top. And in fact, if we add with scores, we can see the current timestamp here. Okay, so now that means if we go to the lesson with an ID of 16, the current timestamp is applied. And by the way, if you're not familiar, when you're using zadd, if the item already exists, it simply updates the score. So anyways, if we were to give this another refresh, now this one is at the top because that timestamp is most recent. Pretty cool. So let's grab that. We're going to come back and we can spit this data out now. Here's what we typed into the command line, and we'll convert it. Z-rev range, user.1.in-progress, 0, -1. But you know what? We don't want all of the items. Let's say we want the 3 most recent ones. Well, we can always just say not 0, -1, but 0, and let's just say 0, 1. So if we do that, we get 2 items, the first item and the second. If we want 3, then we say 0, 2. Makes sense? So let's update this. Now, right now, we don't have a collection of lessons. We have a collection of IDs. So if we come back and give this a refresh, those are the 3 most recently visited items. So like if I go to lessons/4 and we go back, now 4 will be at the top. Okay? So it sounds like we should do this. Yes, we could just do lesson find or find many. It's going to do the same thing. And then feed it an array of IDs. And it is true, you will get those. So do note though, 4, 16, 25. We run this though, and of course, just by coincidence, the order happens to be as we would expect. But let's try to mess it up. Okay, so now, even though we just visited the lesson with an ID of 30, when we performed the query, it was at the bottom. And you can even see right here, if I were to say return in progress, you'll see it at the top. So 30, 4, 16 is the order that we want. But once we ran it, yeah, it's not going to be consistent when you're working with Eloquent and a MySQL query. There's no guarantee about the order. So you can solve this in a number of ways. One, you perform the query, and then you handle the sorting on the collection side, either by using sort by or a form of map, where maybe you'd save all of your lessons, and then you'd just say, return the lesson where the index matches this. You know, there's lots of ways to do this. However, we're only fetching 3 items, so even if we perform 3 quick database queries, I think that's easy and simple enough. So why don't we do this? Let's collect in progress into an array, and then we'll map over them, and for each ID, I'm just going to return the lesson associated with that ID. And if it helps, why don't we say in progress IDs, and then we'll save this to in progress. Okay, so now they should be in the proper order, and they are. Simple enough, easy way to go. All right, so let's give it a refresh. And the only remaining step is to display these. So I'm going to go to lesson/index, and why don't we say all lessons, and then I'm going to duplicate this. And we'll say in progress and filter through them. Okay, so let's pass in progress through to the view. Clean this up just a touch. And of course, if you want to put this in a repository or a private method, anything you want to do, of course, is perfectly fine. So we come back, and there we go. How about we click on this one, Asumenda. Okay, we come back, and now that is the most recently viewed one. How about this one, Fuga? Now that is the most recently viewed one. Very, very simple to implement. I mean, take a look. Most of this episode was me talking. The actual code we wrote is simply, whenever you need to, you add to the sorted set, and you set the score equal to the current time, and then wherever you need to, you just fetch the items from that sorted set, filter through them, and perform the necessary queries to fetch them.